Hello everybody, Vinyl Community. Mr. Rick back again for session number 2 of Classic Country. I decided to stay with Classic Country because I have so many albums that I would love to show you, and so I've decided for this week also I'm going to stay with the Classic Country, and one of these days I'll show you the entire collection. Let's get it started if we can. This is the first album that I wanted to show you. Connie Smith's first album from 1965. You can see that this album has been wet. I picked this up at a yard sale, and it's got some damage to it. But a very good album from 1965. Even Though is on it, which was a hit for her, and I Can't Remember was another hit that she had on it. In her young years, Connie Smith was one of the great female artists, of course, that I'm sure many of you. But if you happen to see this album somewhere in your tracks, take it from me. It's a good country album, and it's a good listen too. A very good listen. Cute and Country Connie Smith. Here's an album that's in 1959 took off like hotcakes. Marty Robbins, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs. And as I'm sure you're aware, El Paso was a smash hit, and that is the song that he's most known for. That came off of this album, as well as Big Iron came off of this album, and Strawberry Roan was also a hit for him, and there are several others. It's just a good album for cowboy songs and everything, and it is one of his best albums. Marty Robbins from 1959, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs. There's a second album, this Volume 2, which is called More Gunfighter Ballads, that he released, I think, in 1964, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure on the date. But great song, great album, and of course, you know, a great country music singer, Marty Robbins. Here's an album that came out in 1970. This is Ringo Starr. Now you're probably wondering what in the world I'm doing with Ringo Starr in a country music classic, but this album, when the Beatles broke up, Ringo Starr, his first release after the Beatles broke up, was this album, Buku Full of Blues. And he traveled to Nashville to record it. Let me read you some of the names that are playing on this album. There's Buddy Harman, Charlie Daniels, the Four Jordanaires, Charlie McCoy, Jerry Kennedy is on it, Jerry Shook is on it, Grover Lander, Jim Buchanan, Roy Husky Jr., Pete Drake, DJ Fontana, Jerry Reed is on it, and Jeannie Kendall is also on it, of the Kendalls. This album has so much talent on it that it can't do anything but be good. And I picked this up at a yard sale, and it is a good album. I'm sure it didn't sell very well, and I'm sure when this came into the country music radio stations, they probably looked at this and laughed, you know. But anyway, Buku Full of Blues, Ringo Starr. It's a good listen. So if you happen to see a copy of this floating around somewhere, pick it up, and you won't be disappointed. I can promise you. It's good country. Here's another good country man. This is Mel Tillis. This is his 1976 Best Of album that came out when he was with MGM. He was with, I believe it was it MCA back in the 60s? I'm not sure, but these are the hits of the 70s. The Sawmill is on it, Memory Maker, The Best Way I Know How, The Arms of a Fool, which is one of my favorite Mel Tillis records, I Ain't Never, Stomped in Grapes, A Brand New Mr. Me. This came out in '76. It's a good album, and of course everything Mel Tillis puts out is good. You can't go wrong with Mel Tillis, and he was. This is one of my favorite Mel Tillis albums that put out. So there's a good listen there. Here's Ricky Skaggs, the first album that made him popular, from I believe 1982 is when this came out. Ricky Skaggs had been recording bluegrass for years before this album came out. But this was the album that came out and put him on the charts, and it was also the album that started the, I want to call it the comeback to country, because back then in '82, if a lot of people out there that were around listening to country music was kind of boring, and it had been around, popularized so much. And Ricky Skaggs was one of the first people to come out and drive it back to strong country. Heartbroke is on here. This is one of his great. I Wouldn't Change You If I Could. Highway 40 Blues and One Way Rider. Just a few of the hits that were on here. But this is his. This was the album that put him on the map, so to speak, and let you and everybody. I guess everybody. I went out and bought it when I heard it, and I thought this was a great album, and it is a good album too. So there's another one that you can't go wrong with. We'll go back to the beginning now. There's a record label called County Records. I don't know if they're still making records or not, but back in the 60s and the 70s, they went back and they were picking up the old artists from the 20s and the 30s. Uncle Dave Macon was one of them. The Fruit Jar Drinkers was another. The old bands that were in hillbilly music way back in the 20s and 30s. And this is the Skillet Lickers album. Gid Tanner, Clayton McMitchen, Riley Puckett, Low Stokes, Burnt Lane, and Fate Norris. They were all famous. Riley Puckett, they think, is one of the people that Mother Maybelle was influenced by. He was, but they all came out about the same time. But Riley Puckett was a blind guitarist, and he clicked the bass strings just like Mother Maybelle Carter did. But a lot of their good hit rock records are on here also. Watermelon on the Vine, and Ride Old Buck to Water is another one. The Bully of the Town from 1926. A lot of good things. And of course there's a great write-up on them also on the back. County Records was great at doing this kind of thing for the very early country music that people that like to can study and hear the real roots of country music, and the Skillet Lickers were definitely one of those people. So that's another good listen. Those County Records are kind of rare. I haven't seen one. I had to order that one through the mail. Another 1960. Sons of the Pioneers, Cool Water. This was their signature album. The Sons of the Pioneers had been around since the late 1930s, actually. Roy Rogers was part of the Sons of the Pioneers, back when his name was Leonard Sly. But the Sons of the Pioneers were just that. They were cowboy singers, and they sung cowboy songs, much like Tex Ritter did and several others. And this is a good example of it. This is a lot of their hits in 1960. They all went back into the studio and they re-recorded all their hits. And Cool Water is on here, and The Last Roundup, and Riders in the Sky, and Riding Down the Canyon, Tumbling Tumbleweeds, and all those great songs that the writers of the Sons of the Pioneers were known for is on this album. And it is a good listen, and this is a very popular album of theirs that came out in 1960. It's a good sound too. These old Living Stereo albums that RCA Victor was putting out back then, stereo had just been recorded, or not recorded, but it had just been developed a few years before, and these old RCA Victor Living Stereos, they were playing with the sound of these, you know, putting the singer in one channel and the choir in another channel, and they just all, these early records, they were just wonderful to listen to, the separation of the music. Buck Owens fans, you can't get any better than this. Buck Owens in the mid-1960s, he owned the 1960s. He was one of the most popular country music singers around. This is just up to that. When Buck Owens came out in 1959, and this is his sound from 1959 without the electric guitars and of Don Rich and everything in it. This has got the fiddle in it. This was when he was trying to make it, and his earlier stuff, Love's Gonna Live Here, Fooling Around, Under the Influence of Love, If You Know Act Naturally, Under Your Spell Again, Second Fiddle, a lot of these old records, and this is it's just great country. It's just great, strong, honky-tonk driving country, and that's my type of country that I love. I love the old honky-tonk sound, and Buck Owens and these early Buck Owens albums, they are they do that just splendidly, and this album is a great example of it. If you happen to find a copy of this, pick it up. Like I said, it's the best of Buck Owens, his hits from 1959 to 1963. The Beatles were Buck Owens fans, and they collected his records too, from what I hear. But this is a great album. It's really good. Here's Randy Travis's first album. It came out in 1986. I remember hearing the first song from this gentleman when I was working in a house, putting in heating and air conditioning. And I remember when I heard the first record of his, I said, that guy is going to make it. He's got a great voice. And after the record was finished, the radio announcer came on and he said the same thing that I was thinking. This guy is going to be good. And he was, of course. And this is his first album, Storms of Life. It came out in 86. And it's also one of his great, Digging Up Bones is on here. On the Other Hand is on here. 1982, you probably remember that. And it's a good country sound. And this is, you know, back when country music was making a comeback, and there was Dwight Yoakam was coming along, and there were so many others that were in that pile, and he was in. This is his first effort, so you can't go wrong with this one either. This is a great album. I'm really proud to have it. I've got several of his albums, and this is one of my personal Randy Travis favorites, Storms of Life.
Okay.
And last but not least, the number one record from the number one country album, I should say, from 1973, Charlie Rich, Behind Closed Doors. Charlie Rich in the 1950s had been a rock and roll star. Many of you probably know that. And in the 70s, he came out, and this was the first album that really set him off. That has Behind Closed Doors on it, of course, and The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. You probably remember that one. I'm not sure, but I think that was the number one song in 1973, but don't hold me to that. But a very good album, a lot of good songs on it. It's really a good lesson. I love, my favorite is Nothing in the World to Do with Me, which is one of my all-time Charlie Rich favorites. It wasn't a hit, but it was definitely one of the great songs. And a good listen. So if you happen to come across a copy of Charlie Rich, Behind Closed Doors, pick it up. It's a good listen. Okay? And that's all I've got for this week. I look forward to doing some more, and hope you'll enjoy it. If you enjoy it, come back, and we'll try to get at least one a month, if not one every 2 weeks, out there, and show you some of these great classic country albums. Okay? Until then, peace, and hope you all have a great week, and we'll be back again. Bye-bye.